The stars outside the viewport had never looked so cold. Ambassador Clara Voss stood at the narrow window of the Conclave Station Solène and watched the galaxy turn slowly beneath her. She had been on the station for 3 weeks, pushing paper, shaking hands with creatures that had no hands, and trying to make humanity seem reasonable to beings who had never once considered humans worth taking seriously. She had been patient. She had been polite. She had followed every rule the Conclave gave her. None of it had mattered. The session had lasted less than an hour. 7 species, 7 votes, 1 result. The Conclave Council had spoken in its clicking, humming, layered language, and the translator unit on her wrist had turned it all into plain words that cut like a blade. The Severance Protocol had been approved. Humanity was classified as a Tier 0 threat. That meant one thing and one thing only: complete removal. Every human colony, every ship, every station, every person. Clara had stood up from her seat and tried to speak. The guards had moved before she could finish her first sentence. Now she was being held in a side room near the docking bay, and she had maybe 10 minutes before they cut her communications access entirely. She pulled out her personal transmitter, the small one she kept tucked inside her jacket for emergencies, and she started talking fast. She did not know who would hear it. She just knew she had to try. Out near the edge of the Kepler expanse, Captain Leon Hart was eating a cold meal and reading a maintenance report when the signal came through. It was broken, full of static, coming in pieces. His comm officer, a young man named Eli Cross, pulled it up on the main screen and ran it through the filter 3 times before the words started making sense. Leon set down his fork. He listened to Clara's voice, cutting in and out, saying words like protocol and removal and unanimous and extinction. He listened to the fear underneath the calm she was trying to hold on to. He listened until the signal went dead mid-sentence, like someone had simply reached over and switched her off. The bridge of the Endurance was quiet. No one moved. Everyone was looking at Leon. He sat there for a moment, thinking about what he had just heard. Leon was not a man who panicked. He had grown up on a station in the outer belt where panic got people killed. He had served in 3 different deep space postings, had talked his crew through emergencies that would have broken other captains. He was calm, careful, and slow to believe the worst. But he believed this. He turned to Eli. He told him to get every ship in the area on a private channel. Not the standard frequency. The old backup one, the one the Conclave's listening systems had never bothered to map. Eli asked how many ships. Leon said all of them. Then Leon went to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, at the nearest human colony, roughly 4 light-years away, a settlement of 11,000 people lived on Proxima Centauri b. Miners, mostly. Families. A few scientists. A small clinic. A school with children who had never seen Earth except in pictures. They had no idea what had just been decided about them in a room they would never know existed. Leon thought about sending a warning. He ran through the math in his head. The signal would take too long. The Conclave ships were already moving. He could see the patrol vectors shifting on his tactical screen, units repositioning, corridors being closed off. Whatever was coming was already on its way. His comm officer's voice came across the bridge then, quiet and tight. The Proxima colony had just gone silent. Not a communications failure. Not a technical issue. The entire settlement had gone offline in under 4 minutes. One moment 11,000 people were broadcasting the normal noise of daily life, work shifts, weather reports, children's school broadcasts. Then nothing. A flat, empty signal that meant only one thing. Eli played the last fragment of audio from the colony's open channel before it died. Leon made himself listen to it. The screaming lasted about 30 seconds. Then there was silence so complete it felt like the universe itself had taken a breath and held it. Leon stood very still at the viewport. His hands were loose at his sides. His face did not change. He turned back to his crew and told them to prepare to move. Quietly. Dark running, no active signals. He told them they were not going home yet. He told them they were going to find anyone left alive. Nobody argued. Nobody asked why. They just started moving. The stars outside the viewport had never looked so cold, and Leon Hart had never felt so certain about anything in his entire life. The life pod smelled like burnt wire and blood. Corporal Dex Calloway had been floating in it for 6 days when the Endurance pulled him in. He was thin, dehydrated, and had a long cut across his left arm that he had wrapped tightly with a strip of his own shirt. He walked out of the pod bay under his own power, which Leon took as a good sign. Then Dex sat down on the floor of the corridor and did not move for a long time, which was not a good sign at all. Leon sat down beside him and waited. After a while, Dex started talking. He described the Proxima colony in short, flat sentences, the way a person talks when they have gone over something so many times in their head that all the feeling has been squeezed out of it. He said there was no warning, no signal from the Conclave, no demand for surrender, no final communication of any kind. The ships had simply appeared in orbit, and then the bombardment had started. He said it was over fast. He said fast was probably the only mercy in it. He had gotten into the pod because his training said to get into the pod. He did not know why he had survived and the others had not. He said he had stopped asking himself that question because it did not lead anywhere useful. Leon listened to all of it. Then he thanked Dex, helped him to his feet, and sent him to the medical bay. Dr. Nina Fowler was already deep in work by the time Leon found her. She had her screen spread across 3 walls of her small lab, and she was moving through them fast, pulling files, flagging data, muttering quietly to herself. Nina was the Endurance's xenobiologist, a woman who had spent 15 years studying alien species not for military purposes but simply because she found them endlessly interesting. That curiosity had now become the most valuable thing on the ship. She had intercepted a Conclave intelligence file 2 days earlier. She had been picking it apart ever since. She turned around when Leon entered and told him what she had found without waiting for him to ask. The Conclave's assessment of humanity had been built over decades of passive observation. They had watched human history through long-range sensors and data collection. They had seen the wars, the collapses, the famines, the endless political arguments that played out across every generation. They had concluded that humans were, at their core, a fractured species. Divided, emotional, and prone to falling apart under pressure. The Conclave had believed that the moment the Severance Protocol began, humanity would scatter. Survivors would run, hide, or surrender. There would be no organized resistance because humans, in their assessment, were not capable of organizing anything under extreme stress. Nina looked at Leon and said that was the most dangerous mistake the Conclave had ever made. Leon asked her why they thought that. She said because they had studied humanity like scientists studying an insect. They had watched from a distance and recorded the surface. They had never once tried to understand what it felt like to be human. They did not understand what humans did when the thing they loved most was threatened. They had no data on that, because no species had ever pushed humans that far before and survived long enough to write it down. Leon asked her what else the files said. Nina told him the Conclave had never fought a real war. In all their history, the 7-member species had resolved their differences through negotiation or through quiet threats. The only true military operations they had ever conducted were exterminations of pre-warp civilizations that could not fight back. Civilizations that had no faster-than-light travel, no advanced weapons, no understanding of what was happening to them. The Conclave had never faced an enemy that could chase them. They had no doctrine for it. Their commanders were administrators, not warriors. Over the next several days, Admiral Roy Garner made contact. His message was tight and brief, coming from a hidden base deep inside an asteroid belt in the outer system. He had been pulling ships toward him quietly, one by one, collecting whatever was left. He did not tell Leon how many he had. He just said to come, and to tell no one outside the encrypted channel. Leon set course immediately. On the 3rd day of travel, the Endurance ran into a Conclave patrol. 3 ships, well armed, moving in a standard intercept formation. Leon looked at his tactical screen and saw that they were outgunned in every category that mattered. His weapons officer started running firing solutions. Leon told him to hold. He studied the patrol formation for a moment. He thought about the way the ships were moving, the spacing between them, the pattern they were using. Then he pulled up the NAV data and looked at the debris field off the port side, the broken remains of an old freighter that had been drifting in this stretch of space for 20 years. He gave his helmsman a heading that made no sense at first glance. They flew straight into the debris field, which pulled the patrol ships after them because patrol protocols said to follow. Then Leon used the thruster burn at full power in a very specific direction, pushing a wave of debris outward like a slow-moving wall. The lead conclave ship's gravity systems fought to compensate and overloaded. The other two pulled off to avoid colliding. By the time they sorted themselves out, the Endurance was gone. His crew was quiet for a moment. Then Eli asked how Leon had thought of that. Leon looked at the empty space where the patrol ships had been and said simply that they had no other option, so he found one. He did not say what he was really thinking, which was that the conclave had been right about humans in one way. Humans did fall apart under pressure, and then they put themselves back together in ways that nobody expected. They called the base cradle, which was either hopeful or ironic depending on the day. It sat deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid, completely dark from the outside, invisible to standard sensors. Roy Garner had chosen it because it had no strategic value to anyone, which meant no one would bother to look for it. 347 ships were docked inside or anchored in its shadow. Roughly 60,000 human survivors moved through its corridors and makeshift bays, sleeping in shifts, sharing food supplies, fixing things that kept breaking, and not talking much about what they had lost. Leon arrived with the Endurance and 11 ships he had gathered along the way. Roy met him in the docking bay. The Admiral was a large, quiet man with gray at his temples and eyes that had not slept properly in weeks. He shook Leon's hand and did not waste time. He took Leon to a briefing room and showed him the numbers. Humanity had lost roughly 80% of its population. The surviving fleet was a mix of military vessels, civilian ships that had been hastily armed, and old freighters loaded with whatever weapons their crews could bolt on. Almost every ship was damaged in some way. Ammunition was limited. Medical supplies were running thin. On paper, there was no version of the math that led anywhere good. Leon looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he asked where Nina could set up her workspace. Nina Fowler had not slept much either, but she was moving with a kind of sharp, focused energy that comes from having something important to do. She had spent the journey to Cradle reading through every conclave battle record she could find, pulling apart their tactics, their formations, their response patterns. By the time she stood in front of Roy and Leon and a room full of grim-faced officers, she had built a picture that changed the feel of the briefing entirely. The conclave, she explained, was a hierarchy. Every decision moved through a chain of command. Every action required authorization from above. Their commanders did not think on their feet because they had never needed to. The systems they used to fight worked perfectly against enemies that fought the same way, predictable, structured by the rules. Against an enemy that threw out the rules entirely, they had no answer. Their response time to unexpected situations was, on average, 11 times slower than a human crew under pressure. Someone in the room asked what good that did when the conclave had twice the ships and 3 times the firepower. Nina said it meant that every engagement had to be built around doing things the conclave had never planned for. Not hitting where they were strong, but confusing them, making them hesitate, making their systems give them wrong answers. She said the goal was not to outfight them. It was to outthink them before they could catch up. Roy listened to all of it. Then he nodded once and said they would start training immediately. Private Sarah Malone had been an engineer on a colony ship before the war. She was 24 years old, quiet in the way that some people are quiet when they are holding a very large amount of feeling inside a very small amount of space. Her entire family had been on a colony that was destroyed in the first wave. She did not talk about them. She worked. She had been working on something since the day she arrived at Cradle. She had salvaged components from 3 different damaged ships and spent every off-shift hour in the engineering bay putting them together. When she finally showed it to Leon and Roy, it was a compact device the size of a backpack that she said could destabilize the resonance core of a conclave warship if deployed at close range, effectively turning the ship's own power system into the weapon that destroyed it. Roy asked her how confident she was that it would work. She said she had run the calculations 400 times and she was confident. She said it quietly, without any pride in it, as though she were simply reporting a fact. Roy said they would build as many as they could. 2 days later, the conclave broadcast a message across every frequency they could reach. It was intended for other species in the galaxy, a declaration and a warning. The message said that the human species had been successfully removed, that the severance protocol was complete, that humanity was, as of that moment, officially extinct. The broadcast reached Cradle. It played over the main speakers before anyone could stop it. 60,000 people heard it. Leon was in the command room when it came through. He stood still for a moment after it ended. The room was completely silent. Then he turned to the officers around him and said, in a voice that was calm and even and carried no anger in it at all, they had just made it very easy. Someone asked what he meant. He said that a species with nothing to lose had nothing holding it back. He said the Conclave had just removed every reason for caution. 3 days later, Cradle launched its first coordinated strike. 3 Conclave patrol fleets, each one expecting to clean up isolated survivors, each one using the standard formations that had never failed them before, encountered something they had no protocol for, a coordinated, multi-point assault that hit from angles their sensors could not track, using tactics their command chain had never seen and could not process fast enough to answer. All 3 engagements were over in 11 minutes. Humanity won all 3. In the debriefing afterward, no one cheered. People sat quietly at their stations and looked at the data on their screens. They had won. It had cost them. And there was so much more ahead. But the monster the Conclave had made was awake now, and it had just opened its eyes. The Conclave Intelligence Corps began to file reports that made their commanders deeply uncomfortable. The reports said that human forces were not behaving like a defeated species. They were not hiding in the dark corners of space and waiting to be found. They were moving. They were hitting supply lines. They were appearing in places the Conclave had already swept clean and confirmed empty, and then disappearing before a response could be organized. The reports used words like coordinated and persistent and, in one document that circulated among senior Conclave officers, deeply irrational. That last word was the most telling. The Conclave could not understand why humans kept fighting when all the numbers said they should have stopped. Leon Hart's strike group was the reason for most of those reports. Over 2 months of running operations, his crew had developed something they simply called the Echo Run. It worked like this. Every major Conclave warship produced a gravity wake as it moved through space, a trail of distorted physics that standard sensors ignored as background noise. Leon's navigator, a sharp young woman named Kay Briggs, had spent 3 weeks mapping those wakes and figuring out how to use them as cover. A ship moving inside a gravity wake looked, to Conclave sensors, like nothing at all. They used the debris fields of destroyed human colonies as cover for their approach runs. It was deeply grim work, passing through what remained of places where people had lived. But those places now served a different purpose. The Conclave never thought to monitor its own destruction for threats coming out of it. Why would they? The things they had killed were not supposed to come back. Leon's group hit 8 command vessels over the course of those 2 months. They lost 4 ships doing it. Every mission cost something. But every mission also came back with data, with damaged Conclave systems, with supply routes disrupted and patrol schedules thrown into confusion. The Conclave kept adjusting its responses. It kept adjusting too late. Sarah Malone's devices worked exactly as she had said they would. She had personally delivered the first one, on a boarding operation against a Conclave logistics ship. She had walked through the corridors of that vessel with a weapon in her hand and her face completely still, and she had placed the device exactly where the calculations said it needed to go, and she had walked back out and they had evacuated, and then the ship had destroyed itself from the inside out. Sarah had watched the explosion on the rear screen and said nothing at all. Roy Goner was planning something larger. The Vela corridor was the main artery through which the Conclave supplied its forward positions. Cut it, and the entire forward fleet would begin to run low on ammunition, fuel, and replacement parts within weeks. Roy had been planning the strike for a month, running simulations, cross-checking Nina's tactical profiles against every variable he could think of. The operation required 43 ships, precise timing, and a series of diversionary actions that would pull Conclave patrol coverage in 3 different directions at once. He briefed his senior officers the night before. He told them it would cost ships. He told them it would cost people. He asked if anyone had something to say. Dex Calloway, who had recovered from his time in the life pod and was now leading a Marine boarding unit, raised his hand. He said he had one question. He asked Roy if it was going to work. Roy said yes. Dex said then he had nothing else to say. The operation ran for 9 hours. It was brutal and fast and nothing went completely according to plan, because nothing in real combat ever does. 11 ships were lost. Over 2,000 people did not come back. But the Vela corridor was collapsed, 3 critical relay stations destroyed, 4 supply depots disabled, the main transit route blocked by debris that would take weeks to clear. For the first time in the war, the Conclave's forward fleet began to slow down. Nina wrote in her private log that night. She had been keeping one since the beginning, not as a military record but as something personal, a way of watching what was happening to the people around her. She wrote that she had noticed a change. Humans had stopped mourning during operations. Not because the grief was gone, but because it had found a different place to live. It sat quietly in the background while the work was being done, and it came out later, in the dark, when the shifts were over. She wrote that it was not that they had become cold. It was that they had learned to hold 2 things at once, the loss and the mission, without letting one destroy the other. She wrote that she did not know if that was strength or damage. She did not write that sentence in her report to Roy. The Conclave's response to its supply crisis was to send an envoy, not to humanity, but to the Driven, one of the 7 Conclave species. The Driven were the smallest member of the Council, and they had a reputation for quiet, private disagreements with Conclave policy. The envoy was intended to pressure them into contributing more ships to the forward campaign. The Driven sent a message to Roy Garner instead. It came through a coded channel that Roy's signals team almost dismissed as a glitch. The message was simple. It said that the Driven had not voted for the Severance Protocol. It said they had been given no real choice in the matter. It said they wished to speak with whoever was in command of the human forces. Roy read the message twice. Then he sent a reply with a time and a location. When the Driven envoy arrived, Roy sat across from the alien for a long moment in silence. He studied it. Then he asked one question. He asked where the Conclave's high command station was. The Driven was quiet for a very long time. Then it told him. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in complete silence. No warning signals. No open communications. One moment the space around Aurelius Prime was empty, and the next moment it was not. The Conclave's early warning systems registered the contact and fired off alerts, but the alerts traveled up the chain of command to commanders who read them with disbelief and then read them again, because the numbers were wrong. They had to be wrong. Humanity was extinct. The Council had made the announcement themselves. The numbers were not wrong. Roy Garner stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical display as 312 human vessels moved into position. The formation was not like anything the Conclave had seen before. Nina had designed it specifically for this engagement. Not a standard attack pattern, not a defensive shell, but a shape built around the specific weaknesses in the Conclave sensor grid, the blind spots in their targeting systems, the gaps that only showed up when you had spent months studying every piece of data they had ever let slip. Roy said to his helm officer to hold position. He wanted the Conclave to see them. He wanted them to understand what was coming before it arrived. For 3 minutes nothing happened. Roy counted quietly in his head. Then the Conclave fleet moved to intercept, and the battle for Aurelius Prime began. Leon Hart did not wait for it to finish. He had his own work to do. He took a boarding team of 40 people onto a fast attack ship and came in low along the station's hull, below the weapons coverage, using the Echo Run 1 last time. Sarah Malone was with them. She had her kit bag over one shoulder and her device in her hands, and she moved through the docking sequence with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. Dex Calloway was at the front of the group, rifle up, moving fast. They breached the station through a maintenance corridor that Clara Voss had identified in her transmission fragment, a detail so small that the intelligence team had almost missed it. The corridor led them past the station's secondary power grid and into the inner ring, where the real structure of the place opened up around them. Aurelius Prime was enormous inside. Long corridors of dark material, strange lighting, the hum of systems they did not fully understand. Conclave security forces came at them twice. Both times, the fights were short and sharp and the human team kept moving forward without stopping. They found Clara on the 4th level down, in a containment cell behind a door that required a 6-point lock. Sarah cracked in under 2 minutes. Clara walked out looking thin and sharp-eyed and furious in a way that had clearly been building for a long time. She looked at Leon and said she had been waiting. Leon said they had been a little busy. Clara almost smiled. Then she told them she had memorized the station layout, Every corridor she could see from her cell during the maintenance shifts when the guards left doors open. She said she knew where the council chamber was, and she knew 2 routes to get there. She led them at a pace that surprised everyone. Outside, the battle was not clean. The conclave fought with everything it had, and what it had was considerable. 17 human ships were destroyed in the first hour. Roy lost his communications officer to a systems overload on the bridge. People died in ways that would take a long time to fully understand. But the conclave fleet could not adapt fast enough to the way the human formation kept changing shape, kept finding new angles, kept doing things that made their tactical algorithms produce errors. They were slow where humans were fast. They were rigid where humans had learned to bend. The council chamber was at the center of the station, a circular room with a high ceiling and a long curved table where 7 seats sat empty. The council had retreated to a secured inner chamber when the breach was detected. Leon's team cut through the door in 12 minutes. The conclave high council, 7 beings in 7 shapes, sat on the far side of the room and looked at the humans who had just walked in. For a moment no one spoke. Then one of them activated a broadcast on every open frequency and began to read a prepared statement. It offered conditional surrender. It offered negotiated terms. It offered a formal apology to be delivered to all surviving human colonies. Roy's voice cut across the frequency from the fleet. He said he had heard them. He said he had one response. He said that the conclave had declared humanity extinct. He said they had done it on every frequency, to every species in the galaxy. He said that because of that declaration, humanity had no interest in their terms, their conditions, or their apology. He said humanity would set the terms from this point forward, and the conclave could accept them or not, but either way, this was over. The broadcast went out to every listening ear in the galaxy. The council was taken into custody. Aurelius Prime was seized. The severance protocol was formally dissolved before the day was done. There were no speeches after that. No victory celebrations. The survivors of the human fleet docked, repaired what could be repaired, and began the long process of figuring out what came next. People went back to the places where their worlds had been and started clearing the damage. Children who had grown up in ship corridors and asteroid bases saw open sky for the first time. Some of them did not know what to do with it. Leon stood at a viewport in the hours after it ended, watching a star he did not know the name of. Nina came and stood beside him. She did not say anything for a while. Then she asked him what he was thinking. He said he was thinking about all the people who were not there to see it. She nodded. They were both quiet for a long time after that. Then Leon said, quietly, that they had to make sure it was worth what it had cost. The galaxy watched all of it. Every species, every council, every listening post that had ever dismissed humans as a fractured, emotional, self-destructive species watched what a fractured, emotional, self-destructive species had just done to the most powerful military force in known space. They did not have a single word for what they felt. But it was something very close to fear, and something else, sitting just underneath it, that might have been respect.